Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. This episode, as always, is brought to you by Knights of the Raritan, the Rutgers NIL Collective. Knights of the Raritan provides a unique way for Rutgers athletic programs to be successful in the ever-changing NIL environment. Become a member of the Knights of the Raritan for a chance to win giveaways, unique experiences, exclusive event invites, and more. Help Rutgers student athletes with NIL, and I hope you consider doing so. And also sign up for the free newsletter. I'll have the link in the bio of this description. Totally free and keeps you up to date with Rutgers Athletics as well as all the goings-ons within Knights of the Raritan. We're now approaching July 4th week, and this is the dog days of content if you are a mostly daily podcast. So I wanted to react to something that I thought was pretty relevant and interesting, and also just kind of give perspective on the landscape across Rutgers right now in terms from a content media perspective. Obviously going to be a huge year ahead in terms of attention, in terms of, we hope, buzzworthy stories and a lot of national attention for both Rutgers football and men's basketball. But I thought something interesting happened across social media that is relevant to even what I do, as well as just how we all take in content regarding Rutgers and college sports and pretty much everything anyway. So to get to the point, in Indiana, yes, we're talking about Indiana for a minute. Hoosier Hysterics is a podcast hosted by two diehard Indiana fans. It's actually a 24/7 sports hosted podcast, and they went public yesterday with a private meeting they had with men's basketball head coach Mike Woodson. And, there's a lot of context to this, and I don't even know all of it other than that these are two guys that have had a long time podcast. They also contribute NIL, various Indiana programs. I've seen mentioned women's basketball, men's soccer as well, but they're prominent across the athletic programs, and they were pretty involved with basketball. I guess they had access. And at any rate, based on criticisms they've made of Woodson and also just overall behavior, which if you see the response online, a lot of Indiana fans were actually happy that Woodson essentially cut these guys off, and they had a pretty bad meeting and the relationship seemed very good there, talking about how he didn't want their help with anything moving forward in terms of NIL and all that. And it's just, I think, a fascinating angle because they are content producers. They are essentially boosters. And they're very public, and I guess they're both kind of involved in. One of them is, I guess, an actor. The other one has been a producer on television shows. So they have a media background, so that's a little bit different. But it became kind of a buzzworthy story, specifically on X Twitter yesterday, and there were a lot of takes from it. I thought the best article I read on it was Rick Bozick, who's a journalist with Louisville WDRB. And the Post-Tribune Gold Star carrier out there, just talking about how obviously both sides are in the wrong, who discuss the dynamics of this. And, again, these podcast guys, it sounds like the overwhelming theme I heard from or read from fans and on social media was that these guys were making it about themselves. Indiana's had a tremendous offseason, like it or not. And they're going to be the prohibitive, them and Purdue are the prohibitive favorites to the Big Ten going into the 24-25 season. So now you have this kind of story out there, and they are in part harping it on that, Woodson didn't like that they were critical of him during the season. So that's kind of a bad look for Woodson. And I guess how he maybe potentially handled the situation, that was Bozick's point, is he could have handled it. Bozic could have handled it a lot better. Disclosing a private conversation in a podcast is pretty weak. And I think, it's unethical too. So that's kind of what happened there. And now we want to kind of riff off of what that meant to me, because I feel that I'm in a unique space. I'm a longtime fan, and I also ran SB Nation's site for 7 years. I was the managing editor. I got the site credentialed for multiple sports, myself credentialed for multiple sports. And I admittedly went into this with zero sports journalism experience, zero journalism experience. I'm a food service professional. I worked in the restaurant industry and food service corporate dining now for over 20 years, dating myself, and did it in college as well. So I I've always been a fan first, but it also speaks to the changing media landscape, right? In terms of a lot of people think and still think that like I'm official media, that like this is my job, and that I attend every press conference and all this stuff, and I don't, and I certainly have worked hard to gain trust and build relationships within Rutgers Athletics, and I do have access, but it's something that I take seriously. And although I'm not a professional journalist, I feel a responsibility for everybody in terms of how I go about my business, how I handle myself, how I cover Rutgers Athletics, how I cover student athletes, and how I communicate to fans just like me. You have to keep it real. I would have no credibility. It's funny because I get it from both sides during the season. It's much more common that people say I'm a homer and I'm too positive, but I also get from people that I'm being too critical. But you have to have that balance, and that's what I try to. If I do an episode now and I get both comments that I was too critical and too positive, I actually kind of find that to be the sweet spot, that I must be doing it right because I'm getting comments on both sides, and it's subjective, right? And no one is for everyone, and I respect. I've gotten a lot of tremendous feedback over the years, and I've gotten some negative, and I'm even subject on the message boards here and there, and people can have their opinions, and that's fine. And I've never made two bones about the fact that I don't break news. I've been in on some things pretty quickly, and I feel that I am informed pretty well. And my goal with this podcast now, I don't write anymore. For those that have followed me for a while, you know that. If you've just discovered this podcast, you might not know that, but I started the Scarlet Faithful site after leaving On the Banks. And now I just do podcasts because I have a career, I have a family, and it's a lot more fun, and it's a lot better for my quality of life. In terms of what I feel my obligation is to tell it like it is and to keep things real. And yes, I tend to be optimistic, but I think that I back up my optimism with legitimate reason. Going back to the Woodson, Indiana Hoosier hysterics situation, where I find some similarities is, I've talked about at length, especially with men's basketball. I think football has gotten this too, to a degree, in terms of embracing expectations, embracing the attention. And in the social media day, with media being defined very differently nowadays, right? And I know anyone can have a podcast. And my take on Rutgers is that I truly feel I've been fortunate, and I'm grateful that traditional media within the Rutgers world has been very, very good to me and very generous with their time, very respectful, and has supported me throughout this 9+ year journey that I've been on in terms of covering Rutgers athletics as a side hustle. The more coverage that Rutgers gets, the better. And I think with podcasts now, I've always mentioned the Night Report. They're tremendous. 24/7 Sports has one. Rutgers Rant, Steve Politi, Brian Fonseca, Pat Lanning, they do a great job. Alec Rothamal, who I've had on before, he has a podcast. Larry Kane, I've had on before. He has his own YouTube channel. He has a podcast now. It used to be this Are You Screwed podcast with Max Shiner, Adam Helfgott, those guys, Mike Vornikov. And they, everyone has an appeal. Everyone has their own thing, right? Their own style. And I think the more the merrier. And going into the most anticipated football and basketball season in a long time, I'm sure you're going to see some more content pop up. And that is a positive thing. And I think embracing that for Rutgers athletics, embracing that is important. And there's been a major change in that regard. And I think that athletics director Pat Hobbs deserves a lot of credit there. And I think all the coaches do as well. Have all been awesome to deal with. Obviously, Olympic sport coaches love that I am interested and want to give them a spotlight because they deserve it. But also just in terms of my relationship with football and men's basketball, it's been very positive. Embraced me in terms of what I do. And I would say I have a little bit of an advantage because I am not obligated to certain media constraints, right? I am very much, I am a Rutgers fan That is my identity as a person, is very much aligned with being a Rutgers fan. I moved to New Jersey when I was 4 years old because my father got a job at Rutgers. I've been a Rutgers fan essentially ever since. I was going to games when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. And I have very strong memories of those times. So my identity as a human being and my identity as a Rutgers fan is one and the same. My origin story as a person is the same as my origin story as becoming a Rutgers fan. I always have been. So that gives me a unique perspective that I think makes me stand out in this day and age with fan sites popping up everywhere, fan podcasts popping up everywhere. Everyone's going to have their strengths. I feel like I have my own platform that I've worked hard to establish, but I'm able to talk in a way that comes from the heart. And of course, I'm going to be positive. I think the situation with Indiana and Hoosier Hysterics, and again, it does sound like they've crossed the line before. You have a situation now where it just nobody kind of looks good in that situation. And I think, again, the job that Rutgers has done, I mean, I'll give you my own personal experience. When I first took over on the Banks in 2015, I couldn't even get permission to use photos of Olympic sports for articles that I wrote. I understood at the time with Rutgers and, why they would be leery of a fan site. And this was, back in the early days of kind of media evolving to really what is normal now. And I worked really hard to build those relationships. I'll give you my origin story in terms of how I was first recognized by Rutgers Athletics. And it was me being critical. And it was in the 2016 season, the first year of Chris Ash, the first year of Pat Hobbs as athletic director. The ticket office, it was an email promoting the potential resale value of certain home games. Ohio State was one that was mentioned for sure. I can't remember the rest. I can't remember the exact wording. It was, 8 years ago at this point, but it was wild. And I blasted him for it. And I said, this is awful. Like, how can you be trying to sell tickets to Rutgers fans by promoting the fact that you can make money off selling them to opposing fan bases? I mean, it was a joke. And I wrote an article about it. And that was the first time that Rutgers ever responded to me, reached out to me. Pat Hobbs issued a statement to me. I was able to run with that. And in turn, what happened? I praised Pat Hobbs, right, for the statement and for making the change. I remember even there was a message board thread somewhere that talked about someone saying they were on the phone with the ticket office and they heard people scrambling and talking about that they had to have a big meeting, and it was assumed that it was because of this article. And I remember getting criticized by a lot of fans. Why didn't you have communication with the athletics? Why didn't you tell them ahead of time? Why did you have to make this a story? And honestly, because I knew that I wasn't being taken seriously as a platform. And I made that situation known. And I think I was pretty fair about it. And again, what happened in the end of the day? Rutgers acknowledged me. They made a proper statement that it was totally wrong and a mistake, and it was being corrected. And I praised them for it. So it ended up being a really positive thing. And that started my relationship with Rutgers Athletics and Rutgers in terms of building my credibility and rapport with them. And it's grown exponentially from that. That's how it started. And, that came off the fact that, of course, I'm not unique in the fact that, I publicly called for the firing of Julie Herman, Kyle Flood, and Eddie Jordan. I did it relatively early. If you look back, it's funny, like I knew things were different when Rutgers lost to Kansas in football during the Chris Ash era, who I publicly called for his firing. Kansas City paper ran with two quotes from Rutgers coverage, two articles from Rutgers coverage. One was from Steve Politi, who's an award-winning journalist, and the other was me. And again, I don't like to talk about myself, but that I'm just giving you kind of the evolution of where I've come. And because I get comments sometimes that I think that people don't realize like how long I've been doing this, how long I've been a fan, and where I'm coming from, my perspective. So I was extremely critical after that loss at Kansas. It was the lack of effort and no show in that game that it just was clear that the Ash era was not going in the right direction. But that was kind of an aha moment for me as well. But my point with Indiana is that it's so hard nowadays with social media and fan expectation, and it's a win now or else culture. Now, I've also been very vocal over the years that I believe it's the responsibility of the fans to hold their sports teams accountable, whether it's professional sports or college sports. And that's why that's something that I believe in, that I try to support and promote in what I do as a podcaster now. That, you know, I never understood the idea that being critical was negative behavior. Just being blind faith and praise things when there isn't reason to praise is actually counterintuitive and negative behavior, because you're not helping the situation. You're not, if there's a problem and you're ignoring the problem, saying don't worry about the problem, just believe things are going to work out, because that's what you should do. You're a bad fan if you don't. I hate that. I hate that attitude. That's why I think there's always times to be critical, but within reason. And that's why I address troll behavior and super negative behavior too. And I get comments, why are you even addressing this? Why are you giving them, a platform for their comments? Well, because I want to call them out. And, maybe if I do have an ego, I think, which everybody has one. I like to think I don't have a big one. I don't think I do. I don't think I am very good at promoting myself. But if I have a goal, it's to talk about things in a reasonable way, with logic, with facts, with reasoning that people can look at, and maybe it takes them off the ledge a little bit, maybe calms them down a little bit, maybe gives them some reasons to be more optimistic. And that's my mission. And that's why I address the really negative comments. But at the same time, when things, I mean, I've talked about, I had a podcast, I don't know, I forget, I'm old, but talking about the rack, and I pleaded with Pat Hobbs, please don't screw it up. With renovations, please don't screw up the rack. The NIL, when that article came out with NJ.com, Hobbs and Rutgers' lack of attention to NIL, and KTR was in that. And obviously, KTR is my sponsor of the show now, and they do a great job. And I think you've seen Rutgers now evolve in the NIL space as well. And they need to continue to evolve, but they hired an NIL manager. They do a lot more that's organized and supporting NIL. I was critical of both sides then. And I was critical during basketball season when the team was performing so poorly. So you can't just ignore that. And then you have no credibility if you do. But in terms of just relating to what happened on Tuesday with Hoosier Hysterics 24/7 site and Mike Woodson, and that becoming public, and him saying things like, he's going to be the coach as long as he wants to be the coach. I mean, all that, it's out of touch. And in terms of Rutgers now, again, it's so important that they handle things well from a media perspective going into this year. And I think that they have come a long way. And I like to think that I've been part of that journey, just in terms of opening eyes in terms of how coverage can be when it's not just a traditional media newspaper, large corporate site, whatever it may be. Now I'm completely independent. I'm not tied to SB Nation. Certainly gave me a platform that helped me grow. And then when I ran the Scarlet Faithful with the Full Ride Network, and Anthony Antwright, who is, I've had on before. I've done spaces with him. He's a pioneer in the social media platforms in terms of building his own following and creating the Full Ride Network for someone like me to be able to run my own site and really be able to get my voice out there. And that expanded my reach as well in terms of my following on social media and on my YouTube channel. And so I'm always grateful for him. But now I'm completely independent. I don't have resources like others, but it doesn't matter. Everybody can do their own thing. I'm in my lane, you're in your lane, and I hope we both reach the finish line in a positive way. And at the end of the day, for me, it's all about the journey with Rutgers fans. And I think that was the biggest takeaway I took from Indiana fans talking about Hoosier Hysterics, is it seems like they lost that mission, is that they were about themselves. Coming out and airing out Mike Woodson, right or wrong, is not in the best interest of the program. So I think that it's important to support Rutgers Athletics. It's fair to be critical at times, but it's also important to be reasonable and to be fair, and on both sides. And that's what I try to do. And I hope that if you're listening to me for the first time, that jumps out to you. And I hope if you're someone that listens or watches me regularly, I appreciate that. And I hope that maybe is part of why you do. I think one change you're going to see coming soon And I think you've started to see more of it. Oklahoma just came out with it. All their NIL is going to be through promoting content of their student athletes, promoting Oklahoma athletics. I mean, that's a tremendous idea. And with Rutgers football and basketball having their own pods, you're going to see more and more of that. I think you're going to see Rutgers really jump into that space more so with content. And if it can be, with the House decision and the $22 million, we'll see what happens there. More to come on that, and I'm going to address that later on. The more that athletic departments can become sustainable, that can support their student athletes with NIL, the better. And it's just going to change, again, the way their teams are covered, right? It's not just going to be traditional media. It's not just going to be fans like me with their own takes. And it's never been about access, because if I relied on access, I would be the bottom of the barrel, because I don't have the time to even work for that access. If people knew what my day was, in terms of my career, and then obviously going home to my kids, I wake up at 4 a.m. I mean, the fact that I can even get a podcast out 4 days a week, I think is more of a miracle than people realize. And if I don't make sense sometimes, and if I have duds of episodes, I believe it. I never know how I don't even know if I'm making sense right now. But it's, again, it all comes from the heart. It's almost like I black out, like Will Ferrell did in Old School when he's on stage. He's like, I don't even, other than when I go back and edit some, I don't even remember what I said. And I don't even know if it's good when I put it out. I just, and that's something I've grown up on in terms of taking criticism and putting myself out there. It's still surreal. It's still surreal that any one person would even listen or watch to what I'm saying. So I appreciate it so much. And the best part of it is going through the journey with Rutgers fans along the way. And that's why I'm so stoked for this coming year. Podcasts have taken on a life of its own. I mean, look at JJ Redick, a professional podcaster and NBA analyst on ESPN, and now he's the Lakers coach. You don't have to worry about me doing that. But it's so interesting in the way that things have evolved over time in the media, and it's going to continue to evolve. And I think just with Rutgers sports, again, the way they've embraced fans, the way they've embraced content and coverage now, it's been a long haul. It's, they need to continue to do that. They need to continue to give more and more access, I think. And I think they've done a good job so far, but it's got to continue to grow. And for me personally, I'm grateful for any access I've ever gotten or never will get in the future. And my mission is always going to be the same. And that's to be, if one fan tells me something I said helped them be a little more positive, or be a little less negative, or learn something they didn't know about, that makes me happy. If anyone ever came out like they did against Hoosier Hysterics and said it was all about themselves, they only cared about themselves and not what was best for Indiana athletics, that is one thing that will never happen with me. All I want is the best for Rutgers athletics. In the meantime, I'll keep doing what I do, and I appreciate everyone's support and watching and listening to this podcast. And I hope if you're a Rutgers fan, you consume as much Rutgers content as you can. And that's why I like to put a spotlight on some newer names, like I said before, talking about different podcasts. And I hope once the season starts too, I'm sure it's going to be wild with how much content there is on Rutgers, both on a national landscape and locally. There's so many talented and good reporters, journalists, beat writers, sites, independent podcasts, what have you, right now in the Rutgers world. As a Rutgers fan, I think it's the golden era right now in terms of content. Obviously, teams winning helps, but there's so many different ways to consume Rutgers content, and I hope it continues to grow. And I hope it just all of us continue to get better, and we push each other and support each other along the way. So, Mike Woodson, Indiana, Hoosier Hysterics, negative situation over there, bad vibes. Rutgers, good vibes. Happy to be part of it. Grateful for all of your support. Thank you for listening and watching once again, and have a great day.